Jack Miller never expected to end up in an alien zoo. Yet here he was, being marched down a gleaming metal corridor by tall, gray-skinned creatures who called themselves the Watchers. Their compound eyes glittered as they prodded him forward with electric prods, chattering in their clicking language. 3 days ago, he had been leading his usual wilderness survival course in the Montana mountains. Now, he was millions of miles from Earth, taken by these aliens who seemed to view humans as nothing more than interesting specimens for their collection. "Primitive species," one of the Watchers said in broken English. "Good entertainment." Jack kept his face neutral, but inside his mind was racing. 20 years of military special forces training followed by a decade of teaching extreme survival skills had taught him to stay calm and observe. He noticed everything: the pattern of guard rotations, the layout of corridors, the slight delay in the automatic doors. The aliens stopped at a massive enclosure. Through the transparent barrier, Jack could see a landscape that looked like something out of a fantasy movie: rocky crags, steaming pools, and cave openings dotting the walls. But what caught his attention were the creatures inside, 3 massive, scaled beasts that could only be described as dragons. Their wings were folded against their sides, and steam occasionally puffed from their nostrils. "Your new home," the lead Watcher announced with what seemed like amusement. "Last human specimen died in 10 minutes. Maybe you last 15. Jack suppressed a smile. These aliens had made 3 crucial mistakes. First, they assumed humans were primitive just because Earth wasn't as technologically advanced. Second, they hadn't properly searched him. The ceramic survival knife in his boot had gone undetected by their scanners. And third, most importantly, they thought they were putting him in a cage with monsters. They didn't realize that on Earth, humans were the monsters. The apex predators who had outcompete every other species not through claws or strength, but through intelligence, endurance, and sheer determination. As the barrier slid open and the aliens shoved him inside, Jack took note of the dragons' behavior. They were territorial, keeping to different areas. They were predators, but they showed signs of intelligence in their eyes. Most importantly, they were cold-blooded, evidenced by how they stayed near the heat of the steam vents. Jack had survived the harshest environments on Earth, trained others to do the same, and now these aliens expected him to simply die for their entertainment? He almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The barrier hummed closed behind him, and the dragons raised their heads to look at their new prey. Jack could hear the aliens gathering at viewing areas, ready to watch the show. He flexed his fingers and began to plan. They wanted entertainment. He would give them a show they'd never forget. But not the one they were expecting. Because in this cage, he wasn't the prey. He was the apex predator. And it was time to hunt. The largest dragon, a crimson beast with obsidian scales along its spine, let out a thunderous roar that echoed off the enclosure walls. The other 2 dragons, one emerald, one bronze, retreated slightly, making it clear who was the dominant creature here. At least, until now. Jack remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing just as he'd taught countless students in his survival courses. Predators react to movement, he whispered to himself. So let them make the first move. The red dragon did exactly that, launching itself from its perch with surprising speed for its massive size. Jack waited until the last possible moment before diving and rolling behind a boulder, feeling the heat wave from the dragon's flame wash over his position. The aliens watching from their observation posts chittered excitedly. But Jack wasn't running, he was observing. Every creature had patterns, weaknesses, and most importantly, intelligence that could be understood. The dragons weren't mindless beasts, their eyes showed calculation, strategy. They were used to being the unquestioned rulers of this artificial domain. He needed shelter, water, and to establish his position in this new ecosystem. The cave systems would provide the first 2, but the third would require something these aliens clearly didn't expect: communication. As the red dragon circled back for another attack, Jack noticed something crucial. Its movements were precise, planned. It wasn't trying to kill him immediately. It was asserting dominance, expecting him to either flee in terror or die trying to fight. Just like any apex predator establishing territory. Jack did something that made the watching aliens gasp. He stood his ground, faced the dragon directly, and lowered his head slightly while maintaining eye contact, a show of respect without submission. The red dragon pulled up short, hovering with powerful beats of its wings, clearly confused by this response. "That's right," Jack said calmly, remembering similar encounters with mountain lions in the Rockies. "I'm not your prey, and I'm not your enemy. Not unless you make me one." The dragon landed 20 feet away, steam curling from its nostrils. The other two dragons watched from their perches, just as interested as the alien spectators in this unexpected development. The red dragon took a step forward, neck extended, studying Jack with ancient eyes. Jack knew the next few moments would determine his survival. He slowly reached down, gathered some pebbles, and began constructing a small pattern on the ground, a simple circular territory marker. The red dragon's eyes followed his movements, its head tilting with unmistakable curiosity. Then, to the astonishment of the watching aliens, the dragon used its claw to draw a much larger circle around Jack's marker. It wasn't just mimicking, it was communicating. Establishing boundaries. Making a deal. Jack heard the aliens' excited chatter turn to confused murmuring. This wasn't the blood sport they'd expected. This was something else entirely. "First rule of survival," Jack said quietly, a slight smile playing on his lips as he looked up at the massive creature before him. "Make allies when you can, and fights only when you must." The red dragon let out a soft rumble and stepped back, returning to its territory. The message was clear: Jack had earned his space, at least for now. But this was just the beginning. He still needed to secure water, food, and learn more about his new companions. As night fell in the artificial habitat, Jack made his way to one of the smaller caves, his mind already working on phase 2 of his survival plan. The aliens wanted to see what humans were really capable of. They were about to find out. Over the next few days, Jack proved why humans had become Earth's dominant species. It wasn't through strength or natural weapons, but through observation, adaptation, and tool use. His ceramic knife became invaluable, not for fighting, but for crafting. He discovered that the dragon's feeding schedule was irregular. The aliens dropped large chunks of meat into the enclosure at random intervals, probably to maintain the creature's aggressive nature. But this created competition, and competition meant opportunity. The aliens watched in confusion as Jack began gathering the tough fibers from certain plants in the enclosure. His fingers worked skillfully, weaving them into rough but strong ropes. The dragons observed his activities with increasing interest, particularly when he started constructing a primitive pulley system near their feeding area. "Tool use observed in human specimen," Jack heard one of the watchers note in their clicking language. "Primitive but unexpected." If they thought that was unexpected, they weren't prepared for what came next. During the next feeding drop, instead of the usual chaotic scramble, Jack implemented his plan. Using his pulley system, he managed to divide the meat more efficiently among the 3 dragons, ensuring each got their fair share without fighting. The red dragon, which Jack had started calling Blaze, seemed to understand the concept immediately. The other 2, the emerald one he named Forest and the bronze one he called Amber, quickly learned that cooperation with the human meant regular, peaceful meals. But Jack's true masterpiece was yet to come. He noticed that the dragons were most active during the artificial day cycle, but struggled to regulate their body temperature during the night cycle when the heating vents reduced output. This was his chance to prove his worth beyond just food distribution. Using rocks, fiber ropes, and his understanding of heat reflection, Jack constructed a series of primitive but effective heat traps near each dragon's sleeping area. The systems caught and retained the heat from the vents, providing warmth through the night cycle. The dragon's response was remarkable. They began treating him not as a tolerated outsider, but as a valuable ally. "Look at their behavior patterns," one alien scientist observed. "The human is altering the established ecosystem." They had no idea how right they were. Jack wasn't just surviving, he was rebuilding the entire social structure of the enclosure. The dragons, with their obvious intelligence, were learning from him just as he learned from them. He taught them signals for danger, food, and rest. They taught him their own ways of communication, specific growls, tail positions, and wing displays that conveyed complex meanings. One morning, Jack woke to find Blaze had left a portion of its meat near his cave. It wasn't just sharing food, it was acknowledging him as part of the pack. The watching aliens were beside themselves trying to document this unprecedented behavior. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. He had earned the dragons' trust, learned their ways, and established himself not as their master, but as their equal. Now it was time for Phase 3 of his plan. The aliens had made one final, crucial mistake. They had assumed that putting a human in with dragons would result in either submission or death. Instead, they had given him exactly what he needed, powerful allies who were just as eager to escape as he was. As he sat near the heat vent that evening, scratching preliminary escape plans in the dirt with his knife, Jack smiled. The aliens wanted to study human survival capabilities? They were about to get a lesson in human ingenuity instead. The real show was about to begin. 2 weeks into his captivity, Jack had learned the enclosure's every weakness. The barrier field flickered slightly during feeding times. The night cycle lasted exactly 8 hours. Most importantly, the Watchers had become complacent, fascinated by their peaceful human specimen who had tamed the dragons. If only they knew what he was really doing. Each night, while the aliens thought he was sleeping, Jack worked. He had discovered that the ceramic blade of his knife could scratch marks into the metallic base of the heating vents, marks that the dragons could read. Simple drawings showing patterns of movement, timing, and positions. His newfound companions proved remarkably quick to understand. "Subject continues to display unexpected intelligence," one of the alien scientists noted. "Recommend reducing observation staff during night cycle due to limited activity." Perfect. Everything was falling into place. The dragons weren't just allies now, they were co-conspirators. Blaze, the red dragon, had figured out how to regulate its flame to melt specific types of rocks in the enclosure into a glass-like substance. Forest, the emerald dragon, had mastered the art of creating diversions by triggering the motion sensors in different parts of the habitat. Amber, the bronze one, proved especially skilled at timing, understanding exactly how long the feeding barrier stayed open. Jack put these abilities to use in ways the aliens never anticipated. The melted rock became crude but effective tools. The diversions allowed him to test the guards' response times. The timing of the barrier gave him the window he needed. But his masterpiece was something else entirely. Using strips of his own clothing and the fiber ropes he'd made, Jack had crafted a makeshift harness. Each night, he practiced securing it quickly around his chest and shoulders. The dragons watched these rehearsals with keen intelligence in their ancient eyes. Tomorrow, Jack whispered to his companions as they gathered near his cave. During the main feeding, the dragons responded with soft growls of acknowledgement. They had learned to trust his plans, just as he had learned to trust their instincts. Together, they had become something the aliens never expected, a team. That night, Jack made his final preparations. He checked the harness one last time, reviewed the timing of the guard rotations, and confirmed the positions each dragon would take. The aliens thought they were watching a simple survival story. They were about to witness a prison break instead. Unknown to their captors, Jack had also discovered something crucial about the dragon's anatomy. Their scales weren't just for protection, they could control their heat radiation, making them nearly invisible to the aliens' thermal sensors when they chose to be. This would be vital for what came next. As the artificial night cycle began to fade, Jack allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had built this enclosure to contain what they saw as primitive beasts. But they had failed to understand a fundamental truth about humans: give them time to think, tools to work with, and a reason to fight, and they would find a way to overcome any obstacle. "Last check tonight," a watcher announced, peering into the habitat. All specimens appear to be resting normally. If they had looked closer, they might have noticed the subtle preparations. The carefully positioned tools. The dragon's too perfect stillness. The gleam in Jack's eyes as he feigned sleep. Tomorrow, the real show would begin. And the aliens were about to learn why humans had a reputation for being the most dangerous species on their planet. They weren't just survivors. They were escape artists. The feeding alarm blared exactly on schedule. Jack opened his eyes, already fully alert. Everything they had planned for weeks came down to the next few minutes. He could see the dragons stirring, their bodies tense with anticipation. "Multiple meat drops today," announced the lead watcher. "Testing social behavior responses." Jack suppressed a grin. The aliens had just given them an even better opportunity than expected. Multiple food drops meant multiple barrier openings. More chances. More chaos. Perfect. The first chunk of meat dropped through the barrier. As planned, Forrest and Amber scrambled for it, creating a convincing display of competition. The aliens leaned forward, eager to see if Jack would use his usual peacekeeping methods. Instead, he stayed back, seemingly uncertain. "Human specimen showing irregular behavior pattern," one alien noted. The second meat drop came exactly 2 minutes later. This time, Blaze roared and charged toward it, breathing fire in a spectacular display. The aliens were so focused on the largest dragon that they missed Jack slipping into position, harness already secured around his chest. The third drop was their signal. Forrest and Amber suddenly broke away from their meat, racing toward opposite ends of the enclosure. Their movements triggered multiple motion sensors, causing warning lights to flash across the alien control panels. "Multiple anomalies detected," a watcher announced. "System performing diagnostic." That split second of confusion was all they needed. As the fourth meat drop began, Blaze launched into action. The massive red dragon spewed forth the hottest flame it could produce, directly at the barrier's weakest point, the feeding hatch. At the same time, Jack sprinted forward, timing his run perfectly. The aliens realized too late what was happening. The combination of the barrier's feeding cycle and the intense heat created a momentary gap, exactly as Jack had calculated. He dove through it, rolling to his feet in the outer corridor. Alarms screamed to life. But they were ready for that too. Forrest and Amber unleashed their flames at the enclosure's thermal sensors, creating a chaotic pattern of heat signatures that confused the tracking systems. In the resulting disorder, Blaze swept down, snatched Jack's harness in its claws, and burst through the weakened barrier completely. Containment breach. The aliens scattered as a full-grown dragon charged through their observation area, a human secured safely in its improvised harness below. Left corridor. Jack shouted, guiding Blaze with the signals they'd practiced. Behind them, Forrest and Amber emerged from the enclosure, providing cover with strategic bursts of flame that kept the aliens at bay. The Watchers had never planned for this scenario. Their weapons were designed to subdue individual creatures, not handle a coordinated breakout by four intelligent beings working in perfect sync. Every time they tried to corner the escapees, another dragon would create a diversion or block their path with fire. Jack's military training kicked in. He directed Blaze through the facility's corridors, remembering every turn from his arrival. The dragon's natural sensors could detect the fresh air currents, leading them toward the exterior. They were close now. So close to freedom. Seal all exits. The alien command echoed through the facility. But they were too late. Forrest and Amber smashed through a viewing window, creating a direct path to the outside. Stars beckoned through the opening, real stars, not the artificial lights of the enclosure. Blaze didn't hesitate, powering through the gap with Jack, while the other dragons followed. They burst into open space, the facility shrinking behind them as Blaze's powerful wings carried them toward freedom. Jack looked back to see Forrest and Amber flanking them, all three dragons flying in formation. They had done it. But they weren't safe yet. Space wasn't silent like in the movies. Jack could hear the roar of alien pursuit vessels launching from the facility, their engines howling in the artificial atmosphere bubble that surrounded the station. His mind raced with calculations. They needed to find a way out of the bubble before their oxygen ran out. There. He pointed toward a shimmer in the distance that had to be the edge of the containment field. Blaze understood immediately, adjusting course while Forrest and Amber moved into defensive positions. The aliens weren't giving up their prized specimens without a fight. Energy beams sliced through the air around them, the Watchers trying to disable rather than destroy their valuable test subjects. But they had underestimated dragon agility, and human tactical knowledge. Break formation. Jack commanded, using the hand signals they'd practiced. The dragons split apart just as an energy net deployed between the pursuit vessels, missing them completely. His military training was paying off. He could read the aliens' attack patterns, anticipate their strategies. The pursuit vessels had better technology, but the dragons had something better, natural instinct combined with human cunning. When two ships tried to flank them, Forrest rolled unexpectedly and breathed fire directly into their engine exhaust, causing them to veer off course. Amber used the station's own solar arrays as cover, weaving between them so quickly that two more pursuit vessels crashed trying to follow. But the aliens had one more trick. A massive containment ship appeared ahead of them, deploying what looked like an energy web across their escape route. They were trying to herd them back toward the station. "They think we'll give up," Jack shouted over the wind. "Time to show them how humans handle a no-win scenario." He had noticed something the aliens hadn't. The energy web had regular pulses, gaps in its pattern. It was just like the enclosure barrier during feeding time. All they needed was perfect timing. "Follow my lead." Jack tugged the harness, guiding Blaze into a steep climb. Forrest and Amber fell in behind them, climbing higher and higher. The aliens followed, probably thinking they were trying to find another way around. Instead, Jack waited until they reached the perfect altitude, then gave the signal. All three dragons folded their wings, diving straight down toward the energy web. The pursuit vessels scrambled to adjust, their weapons' fire going wild as they tried to track the sudden maneuver. Jack counted in his head, watching the pulse pattern of the web. "Now," he shouted. Just before they hit the barrier, all three dragons breathed fire simultaneously. The combined heat hit the energy web at exactly the right moment between pulses, creating a split-second gap. They shot through it like bullets, the aliens' containment ship too slow to react. The moment they were clear, the dragons snapped their wings open, pulling up into a perfect formation. Behind them, the pursuit vessels slammed to a halt at the edge of their own containment field, unable to follow without proper preparations. "We did it." Jack laughed, feeling the real sun on his face for the first time in weeks. The dragons roared in triumph, their voices carrying through space in the last wisps of the station's atmosphere. But their celebration was short-lived. A warning growl from Amber made Jack look back. In the distance, he could see larger ships beginning to launch from the station. The Watchers weren't giving up, they were bringing in their serious firepower. "Time for the final phase," Jack muttered, patting Blaze's scales. They had escaped the station, but they weren't truly free yet. Now came the most dangerous part of his plan. They had to find a way home. The alien warships loomed behind them, gaining ground with every passing second. But Jack had one final card to play, something he'd learned during his time studying the facility systems through the enclosure's barrier. "They think we're trying to escape," he said to his dragon companions. "But we're about to turn their own transportation technology against them." During the feeding times, Jack had noticed that large ships would emerge from what looked like artificial wormholes, the aliens' method of transporting creatures from their home planets. The energy signature was distinctive, a swirling blue vortex that appeared at regular intervals. And one was due to appear any minute now. There. Jack pointed to a spot where space began to ripple. The dragons understood immediately, adjusting their course. Behind them, the warships accelerated, thinking they had their prey cornered. "They're attempting to flee through the collection portal," an alien voice boomed across space. "Activate the containment field." But Jack had counted on this response. As energy beams began to form a net around them, he gave the signal they'd practiced. All three dragons split apart, flying in a triangle formation. The aliens' targeting systems couldn't lock onto all of them at once. The wormhole burst into existence ahead of them, its blue swirl a beacon of hope. Jack knew it was likely programmed to connect to Earth. The aliens had to have a way to collect new specimens, after all. But passing through it wouldn't be easy. "Now!" Jack shouted. Forest and Amber suddenly turned, breathing streams of fire that created a wall of heat and light between them and the pursuing ships. The alien sensors, calibrated for the cold of space, were momentarily blinded. Blaze tucked its wings and dove straight for the wormhole center. Jack held tight to the harness, his heart pounding as space itself seemed to bend around them. Forest and Amber followed close behind, their timing perfect. The journey through the wormhole was like nothing Jack had ever experienced. Colors and sensations that shouldn't exist assaulted his senses. But he kept his focus, knowing they had only seconds before the aliens would follow. They burst out the other side into familiar blue skies, Earth skies. Jack recognized the Montana mountains below, almost exactly where he'd been taken. But they weren't safe yet. "One last trick," Jack grinned. He'd noticed how the wormhole's energy reacted to dragon fire during their passage. "Hit it with everything you've got." As the alien ships began to emerge from the portal, all three dragons turned and unleashed their flames directly into the wormhole's maw. The reaction was spectacular. The portal's energy destabilized, collapsing in on itself with a thunderous boom that echoed across the mountains. The aliens were cut off. They were home. Hours later, as they rested on a secluded mountaintop, Jack looked at his unlikely family. Three dragons from across the stars, who had helped him prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or physical power, it was the ability to adapt, to communicate, to turn enemies into allies. "What do you say?" he asked them, gesturing to the vast wilderness before them. "Ready to help me teach some survival classes?" The dragon's rumbling laughter echoed through the valleys. Somewhere up there, Jack knew, the aliens were probably still trying to figure out how their perfect containment system had been defeated by a single human and three dragons. They had learned what so many others had discovered throughout history: never underestimate humanity's ability to survive, to adapt, and to turn any situation to their advantage. Because humans weren't just another species in the galaxy's vast menagerie. They were apex predators. And now, they had dragons on their side.